The Capricorn Cup is coming up, and it's probably a good time to start to prepare for it because even though I'm not a fan of parent farming, this may be one of the cups that you want to do some parent farming for. So let me explain that. So the Capricorn Cup is pretty much, it's a sprint. So you pretty much just run fast and there's not too much to it. So there's not too many things that you really need to know to really make it work. But let's talk about the things that don't work on a sprint track, such as this one. So what kind of stats do you need for this cup? Well, we got some good news and we got some bad news. Now, the good news is if you've never built an S rank before, this is probably your chance. This is pretty much going to be the S rank cup, if not the whale cup. Kind of. Let me explain. So in this cup, stamina is non-existent. You just don't need it because wit is going to reduce the stamina consumption on pretty much 90% of the track. So you don't need any stamina besides any of the normal stamina that you get. So you can be successful with pretty much anything. So just don't worry about stamina. That's it. It's just a non-existent stat this time around, which is good news. So what does that mean that we need to aim for? Well, essentially you're going to be building a Team Trials Uma. Speed, power, and wit is the three main stats that you're going to aim for. Stamina and guts, you can pretty much ignore them. Now this is an example stat line that is pretty much easily attainable for most decks in the game right now. That's the good news. I mean, people have gotten S rank with all R cards before, so you can do that. But you just have to learn the flow of the game trying to build a power, wit, and speed deck, which is not that hard. We'll talk about that. So through testing, there's not really a big difference between maxing power and maxing wit. Both of them pretty much even, and it's really going to boil down to the skills that you need and get later on and if you activate them at the right time or not. Now, if you max power and wit, of course you're gonna have an advantage over somebody that does not max the other one, but pretty much max speed, 900 power, max wit is pretty much easily achievable, and let's talk about that. So what do we want to inherit? Well, this is where things get a little bit tricky because since it's a sprint, depending on who you want to run, you're going to need a lot of sprint sparks while also wanting a lot of power sparks. Now, power is going to be the main blue spark that you're probably going to want to inherit because wit is easy to get with the wit cards and speed is obviously speed. So this is the tricky part because finding a parent with enough sprint sparks and power is very hard to do. And that's where I referenced earlier that you're going to want to potentially parent farm for enough sprint and power sparks to make it a little bit easier on your life, because somebody with a whale deck is obviously going to have an easy time maxing out their stats even without good parents, but somebody without a whale deck is going to have a little bit of a harder time doing that. So you're going to want good parents. So get to grinding, I guess. So when it comes to inheriting sparks, deciding on who you want to run, a lot of the cast has F rank. So some people have A rank and that's fine, but their inherits, their uniques don't work on the track. But if you want to run somebody with say an F, which is a lot of the cast, where you're going to need a lot of pink sparks, sprint sparks. You're going to need 10 and you're going to need one of them to actually activate during a run. As you can see, I have 9 sparks here of sprint and then I have another, 5 on that. So I have 14 and it's obviously still not enough. I'm still at a B. So you're going to need 1 to pop off during the run. But if I'm in an E, obviously 10 is enough and you can pop them up to sprint fairly easily like that. Now, a lot of guys are recommending Turf S, and Turf sparks are good to get as a secondary because 1, that's the only thing to actually get. But from examining in the Umulator, it's not too much of a difference in the grand scheme. However, that is the basis that both Umas are tied for the same skills and the same stats and everything like that. Not too much difference, but it is going to help because it's just the increased acceleration that it gives. So if you can get it, I would try to get it. So now that we know that, who should you actually run? That's a good question. Let's look at the charts. So the strongest unique that actually works as a pace chaser is El Condor Passes. Now that is the strongest, but it is pretty limited. But it does work most of the time, so it's going to be a good inherit regardless. But of course you need to be in first or second place for it to actually work. Now the next inherit that you can get is Give Mummy a Hug. And that is the next acceleration that actually works during this time. Most other ones are not accelerations and they're just speed bonuses, which is fine because most of the accelerations are probably going to have to come from other skills. It's the same thing with late and ends, where they don't really have an inherit that actually works for acceleration, so you're going to need it from skills. And I don't even need to show you the chart for the fronts because it's the same thing where El Condor Passes is the only one that works and everyone else's, no other accelerations actually work. at least from my knowledge and what the chart says. So that frees you up to actually run who you want to run. Now, of course, if they have a G rank, well, you're gonna need to do some grinding, but that does free you up to pretty much run whoever you want to run. Now, because stamina is not real in the CM, I would recommend against using anyone that has to run the Tenno Spring. I mean, basically any long ones are going to be brutal because you're just not going to have the stamina to actually complete the race and then complete the career. And you don't want to waste getting recoveries just to complete it, so it's kind of pointless. So good luck if you do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. Now I'm going to make a more in-depth guide on Umas that you can actually use, and I'll go individually on, the character guides that I usually make. But going through that, aside from Pasa, what does that mean for acceleration? Well, accelerations are going to have to come in the form of skills. So which skills actually work for acceleration? So let's talk a little bit about that and what not to get. So pretty much every acceleration is RNG based, where most of them can activate pretty early or on a random straight. And a lot of the accelerations don't work because they usually activate on the corners, and the acceleration zone triggers on the final straight. So for example, Russian Gale can work and trigger at the acceleration zone, but can also trigger right in the beginning straight and then do nothing. So pretty RNG based. So as a front runner, you don't really have access to too many aside from Poor Plancha. But if you are a front runner, that's going to be your main acceleration kit. And if you're not in first or second place at that point anyway, then you're going to lose. Everyone else, well, you have a few more options. So let's talk about that. So for pace chasers, well, okay, so for everyone, you can get No Stopping Me, but since it's proccing at the final straight this time, everyone may be spread out on the final corner, and then you may just not run into the situation where you trigger that enough. So I'm gonna have to do some more testing, and that'll be in more character videos. Now, head on works. It's not the greatest, but it does work, and it should trigger hopefully in time, but it's once again another RNG base where it could proc late, it could proc early. It's hard to tell. Now, as the late surgery, you have on your left, so that does work, but once again, RNG based on when it's gonna proc, but it is good, so you could take that, and it's pretty easy to get because you could just borrow that card if you don't have it. So Encroaching Shadow does work as an end closer, so that's good news. The bad news is you have to run Taishin's career, so have fun. Now, things like Burning Spirit Power and Ignited Power, or whatever it's called, does work, but the gains aren't that strong. So if you have the skill points and it's just laying around, I guess you could take it. I wouldn't prioritize it though, just because it's not as cost effective as it could be. So depending on the position that you're running, it seems a lot like either get Poor Plancha as your main Excel, on your left as a late surger, Encroaching Shadow as, Naruto Taishin, I guess. And then you can gamble on another Excel. Now the gamble could work and then you win, or the gamble could not work and then you kind of lose. I mean, that's how a lot of CMs seem like they're going nowadays, but you get the point. So what kind of deck should you be running? Well, let's talk about that, because you have some flexibility and you can decide on what you want to do. So there's a few options, and it depends on your position, of course, and it depends on your Uma. Now, 2 speed, 4 wit is an easy one, or you can do 3 speed, 3 wit. That's probably going to be the easiest and the most classic ones that you're going to see. But you can also be a little bit more flexible with who you want to borrow. You can use Biko, you can use Bakushin. You can even do something like Rico if you want Russian Gale. The only problem with Rico is you don't need the extra stamina, so she's just kind of not necessary, but you can use her. And you can also use another third-party card for an extra race bonus. I've seen people use Nishino Flower just for the extra race bonus. Of course, you've seen the UG players and they do that, but it's up to you. But essentially, you want wit and speed. You don't need stamina, and you don't necessarily need power cards because you can just get that through your inherit and be good to go. So ultimately, you have some flexibility and limitations on who you want to run. It just depends on how much work you want to put in. If you want to make it easy, run Bakushin. If you want to make it a little harder on yourself, you can run El Condor Pasa. You can run Metro Orion. There's a lot of options because the XLs are mostly gained through cards and they're pretty random. So, I don't know. Be flexible. Who are you going to run? I'm going to make a whole character recommendation guide in another video that can go a little bit more in depth, but I didn't want to go too far into this video. And I'll talk about my recommendations as well as what I see in some practice rooms so far. So let me know. If I got anything wrong in the video, let me know as well, and I'll update that in the comment. But all of this information is from the testing, the VF cord, and some other, information videos out there. So also I'm not AI, so don't think that.